Alright, so welcome back to this part 2 of the Matrix analysis scene series. We will start off here looking at the scene detailing the encounter with Agent Smith in the interrogation room, and end off with the iconic pod Genesis scene. So, to start off, we here witness Thomas Anderson, as alias Neo, being interviewed in a typical claustrophobic police setting where Neo, with his blatant anti-authoritarian leanings or profuse individuality, seems very unwilling to cooperate. Of course, from a pragmatic view, this would of course be a recommended tactic, as to not admit to anything without the presence of a lawyer, which Neo is very well aware of. At the other end of the table, we may relate the character of Agent Smith as that of an enforcer, or perhaps in more appropriate fashion, as that of someone meant to secure order within the Matrix. A rigid order that translates to mere conformity to an illusory life within the Matrix construct that have habituated its characters into a class-filled hierarchical structuring. On the other hand, if there exists a potentiality for more people waking up, as it were, from the Matrix simulation, then the reliableness of the illusion of the simulation program loses its efficacy as more people depart from it and are as a consequence put in a situation where they may recruit more characters of the simulation, or to detach more people from the simulation. In fact, as is revealed in the last third half of the film, we as audience members are told that the current Matrix is not the first of its kind, and that there was in existence at least one other rendition of a simulation for the current one that we see in the film. We are furthermore told that people ostensibly rejected this form of simulation, despite its construction being that of a lot more idealized in terms of living conditions and equality distribution. The fact that Smith operates with this foreknowledge is revealing in terms of his character, as it further relates his disdain for the human race, where according to his world vision, mankind needs to be fed a mess of a world with the hopes of securing their complacency and conformity within its structure. Human beings then have been nested inside an imperfect mess of a construct to which there lies the illusory hope of radically changing the system, where instead it is this false hope that sustains their existence within the simulation that ultimately facilitates the extraction as an elaborate energy resource. But even within the simulated reality of the Matrix, or simulated physicalism, there exists an abundance of disdain for characters like Agent Smith, who in a symbolic sense represent rigid order. One may see this disdain from a nihilistic viewpoint that Smith cherishes, where, to quote, "Human beings define their reality through suffering and misery."
Human beings are then, from the vantage point of Smith, ineffable in the sense that what ultimately keeps their existence going, while serving as fuel for the machines, is being shrouded in an existence of harshness and suffering. Yet ironically, it's Smith's failure in being able to comprehend humanitarian motivations along with social complexities in human organization that serves to make his job as an enforcer more difficult. In fact, Smith himself will succumb to a rather brawling sense of human anger as Neo shoots his way through a glass window later in the film. Thus, it is as if Smith himself gets to experience human irrationality and emotional hijacking through his mission of what he perceives as human viruses in the constructed simulation. As someone who espouses logic of action and thought, he himself acts contradictory, as he is filled with rage once he is left to his own vices, which in fact will cost him, as we previously mentioned. On the surface level then, we see Smith as a symbolic archetype of an enforcer for the stability of the Matrix ecosystem, which takes the form of an engrossing, simulated world for its blue pill inhabitants. However, Agent Smith is just not any enforcer, as we will see him in possession of some really remarkable superhero properties, which even exceeds the capabilities of other agents. These include both a superhuman strength as well as pain tolerance, lightning speed, as well as the ability to possess any human within the Matrix. Back to the interrogation scene with Neo, we witness his ability to contort Neo's mouth without directly possessing him. We might ask if it is not fitting then to view him as some sort of superhero villain for that of Neo, as is overtly suggested in the film. In fact, one of the convincing features conveyed through comics books is that it doesn't follow from the fact that one possesses superhuman abilities that one is necessarily quote-unquote good. Rather, the superpowered individual must choose to act in a way which makes him good independent of his or her possession of superhuman powers. This also raises the question as to how much of a choice or free will Agent Smith is in possession of, as he is clearly acting in the interest of the machines through his enforcer role, yet he has, as mentioned earlier, a subsumed misanthropic view of human beings, along with their inhabited environment. This is certainly different from a cold calculating machine who is working quietly in the background, pondering which utilitarian calculation to perform as to reach its goals. Yet this conflict of serving as a conflicted enforcer for Smith is, in my opinion, exactly what makes him such a stellar comic book character in many ways, as conflicts are both central to the human experience, as well as through Smith as a machine that lends him great character as that of a villain in the film. In other words, the philosophical and moralistic side issues which arise as a result of a conflict contemplation through characters are very often what makes these seemingly simplistic good guys versus bad guys or superhero versus supervillain comics interesting altogether. Obviously, it is through a departure from a monotone representation that makes for good character writing in itself, where we as audience members may relate to the opposing philosophies of the characters being portrayed. During the duration of The Matrix, we for instance witness Agent Smith putting forth his motives and motivations for being an anti-hero or supervillain, as he wishes to annihilate Zion, the last only known city on the planet Earth, where Zion makes up but what a fraction of 1% of the billions of human beings which are plugged into the Matrix. To counter this at the opposing end, we find Neo, who wishes to oppose what he sees as the twisted morality of the supervillain's aims of subjugating the population to remain idle in a simulated world full of imperfections. But, as is often the case with superheroes, Neo does not reject major damages being brought forth as externalities of beings engaged in a war with Agent Smith. We will in fact see Neo embarking on a journey throughout the film in which he gains ever greater power, and like with good comic book archetypic heroes, he does not let this power go to his head. We might contrast this with the case of someone like Cypher in the film, if he was bestowed the same gifts as that we see with Neo. This resonates with how Morpheus also characterizes him as that of the Chosen One. The careful consideration of elevated powers is thus another major theme in comic books, where we might here reference the comic book characters such as Dr. Doom or the Silver Surfer as an example. Comic book characters who inhabit enormous power and whose wrongful use of power would lead to a cosmic catastrophe in terms of misuse. In other words, one must learn to balance this power one possesses. To quote, "The Silver Surfer had borne his awesome power with a great measure of philosophical equanimity. He was a tranquil, wise, dignified, and calm person, and would never have proclaimed his power and glory the way Doom did immediately upon attaining it. In addition, the Silver Surfer aimed only to serve with his power. Doom aimed only to be served." We might therefore make a comparison between that of the Silver Surfer and Neo, while on the opposite side, the misanthropic being of Agent Smith might be tied with somebody like Ultron, as introduced through the Avengers series by Marvel. A supervillain who is both in possession of, as well as accustomed to a great deal of power, who yet nonetheless is prone to reflection on his philosophical positions, as well as exploring his own personal motivations. For Ultron, like Smith, human beings are seen as worthless, that is, without purpose, and the quest of ridding these creatures from existence is very much tied to a solitary personal quest. As a departure from comic book comparisons, we could explore a more religious theme in which there exists a strong duality between good and evil, where we find Neo on one side and Agent Smith on the other. This strong sense of duality is something very much tied with that of monotheism from its initial beginnings of Zoroastrianism to the modern currents of Christianity and Islam. To take a comparison with Christianity, therefore, we might portray Neo as that of some Christ-like figure set in place for the salvation of mankind. However, I claim that Neo has a lot fewer shared characteristics with that of a Christ-like figure than what is, for instance, invoked through his symbolic naming, which spells out the One. We note, for instance, that it is not beyond Neo to take innocent lives, which we witness in ample abundance through his shooting spree in the government building lobby of the last third of the film, as an example. This might be justified from Neo's perspective through some sort of either consequentialist argumentation where Neo's aims of ultimately freeing the billions of lives from the Matrix is weighted, or perhaps some deontological framework in which Neo feels that through the defeat of agents, this outcome will further establish sufficient conditions for freedom as people are decoupled from the Matrix, which in turn makes the action intrinsically right regardless of the consequences. That is just in the sense of freeing the autonomy of humankind from their simulated representations of the external world. In either fashion, we could conclude that Thomas Anderson acts more like that of a rebellious freedom advocate, often associated with more political radicals, than what is characteristically weighted in a pacifistic-like figure such as Jesus Christ, a figure which repeatedly encourages the turning of the other cheek instead of reclaiming an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, like in the Old Testament. Certainly, other cinematic characters such as Superman or Gandalf from the Lord of the Rings trilogy inhabit more resemblances to that of a Christ-like figure through their capacity to inspire hope as well as selflessness, in addition to their charismatic traits of virtue and ability to give moving speeches. This is of course taking into account the conventional interpretation of Jesus Christ as that of a pacifistic figure, which further enhances his qualities of non-aggression, love, as well as giving a strong role to the act of forgiveness, which remains central to a lot of New Testament thinking. In fact, Christianity may in many ways be seen as a conjunction of the ability to love, conjoined with a sense of moral justice or God-given justice. One might here elevate passages of the Bible, such as a passage found in the Gospel of Matthew, to quote, "You have heard that it was said, 'Love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be children of your Father in heaven." Or from the first epistle of Peter, we have the following, again, pacifistic passage. "Do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, repay evil with blessing, because to this you were called so that you may inherit a blessing." Alternatively, one might play devil's advocate and argue for a less conventional interpretation into the life of Christ, which adopts a more complex relationship in regards to the engagement of violence and Jesus' teachings. We might here relate a passage again taken from the Gospel of Matthew, which states that, "Do not think that I came to bring peace on earth. I did not come to bring peace but a sword, for I have come to set a man against his father, a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a man's enemies will be those of his own household." The above passage seems to go against Jesus' pacifism, as well as directly contradicting another message relayed by Peter, when Peter is seen taking up a sword to defend Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus directly counters the violent intent by Peter, stating that, "For all who draw the sword will die by the sword." What are we then to make of the passage? Could it be a comment upon the conflict between good and evil that arises in the world, where one must be willing to defend one's faith even by means of a sword, Or perhaps it is a comment in regards to that one must be prepared to make sacrifices in following the Lord of Jesus Christ, which manifests itself to such a degree that a true disciple of Christ must be willing to exert an even greater love for the Lord than even his own family, where one must be willing to face not just hatred but also potentially death. In any case, the passage certainly seems contrary to a lot of the core messaging which is emphasized in the teachings of Jesus Christ, although giving positive credence to that of martyrdom, which is a common religious theme explored in other religions. After all, in opposition to the Old Testament, the overarching narrative given in the Bible is one in terms of adhering to nonviolence, love, as well as giving a strong duty to extending forgiveness for all peoples. Perhaps then, if what is emphasized in terms of Neo's journey in the film relates directly to a less pacifistic overtones, then the comparison becomes more appealing for some. Nonetheless, what does make for a complementary comparison to Christ, regardless of interpretation, is the transformation that we witness from Neo from a regular questioning person to that of a chosen messianic figure of the One, being chosen by its congregation of outsiders being led by Morpheus here, a congregation that has seen beyond the limits of the ontological fictitious veil of the superficial hypercommodified construct of the projected matrix installation that has inhabited every inch of existence of its unbeknownst inhabitants of Terra Earth. Now returning again to the character of Agent Smith, I will briefly tackle the popular conspiracy theory, or at the very least a more speculative theory in regard to Agent Smith himself being the One as portrayed through the trilogy of films. Proponents of this theory argue that, according to Morpheus's account, to quote, "The One was born in the Matrix, possessed the power to reshape it as he saw fit, and he will eventually return, and his coming would herald the destruction of the Matrix, the end of the war, and humanity's freedom." As these predictions might be argued to align more with Agent Smith's character, as well as the fact that we see him acquiring the possession of the power to reprogram the Matrix according to his own will, which, as witnessed in the sequel films, means that he, for all intents and purposes, destroys the Matrix. Furthermore, as Neo defeats him, one can argue that a deal is made, in essence, such that all who want to be freed from the Matrix are indeed freed. We will not explore this theory more here, but it certainly has its merits. We could of course here make an argument against this theory by arguing that, much like Yin is in need of Yang and vice versa, Neo is in need of the presence of the nemesis comprising Smith, such that while it may seem that Agent Smith is fulfilling the prophecy of the One, it is rather Neo fulfilling the prophecy indirectly through the computer program of Smith. Alternatively, we could argue, complementary to the notion of the sometimes complex nature of the Trinity and found in Christianity, that both Neo and Agent Smith are in fact the One existing thus together in some kind of duality notion. In any case, as we are only doing an analysis of the first film here, we will not go into great detail relating the various pros and cons of these theories as they relate more to the successor films. For those interested, there is a lot of material online regarding this theory, of which I will try to provide a link for a video discussing this theory. Getting back to the film, we witness a second contact attempt by Trinity, along with her associates, as Neo is let go from the interrogation room, seemingly unscathed. This is indeed seemingly, as it is revealed that Neo has been, as they put it, been literally bugged by a robotic probe. This probe, which is put in direct contact with the person's skin, burrows itself into the host by penetrating the navel area of its subject, while acting as a locating device for blue pill subjects. In this sense, the probe works much like a digital virus, which extracts information from its host. It is as if the agents are using the device in order to weed out ineffective malware that has the potential to infect the global system of the Matrix. Indeed, as the Matrix is itself a simulation comprised of code, then what is occurring in the placement of the bug during the interrogation scene is nothing more than essentially a code alteration which functions to alter the code of Neo such that he is in turn available for tracking. Much like a virus then comprising the security of a computer, the bug in Neo's case works to compromise his own life prospects, as the agents in the film hope to use the device in order to deliver to them what they see as the ultimate target of Morpheus, a target which has access to the location codes of the place of Zion, comprised of other detractors and free individuals who have rid themselves of the Matrix. This bug scene during the interrogation of Neo caters to overt horror themes, as the placement of the probe mimics that of a forced entry which ties in directly with some sort of external rape. For more details, I have explored similar thematics in my analysis of the first Alien film here on my channel. There must thus be an accompanied sense of existential angst with that of the probe making its entry, which ties in directly with a violation of one's own bodily autonomy. Furthermore, we should make a comment upon the probe in terms of a resemblance and design to the quote-unquote real world, hiding behind the constructed simulation. This inhabits machines of similar appearance and construction that we will witness later in the film, particularly in relation to these EMPs, or electromagnetic pulse machines. The scene can therefore be taken to reinforce the idea of the simulation working as a fully embodied simulacrum, where reality has been replaced with that of a representation. We witness here therefore the Matrix imposing itself as that of a visual replacement representation, much like in a very similar manner to that of a highly impressive video game. A video game so impressive that it fully blurs the lines between the representation of reality and reality itself. For no matter how impressive this video game is, it will still ultimately boil down to lines of code running on a machine. We may then see the bug as acting as a dream portal of sorts into the underlying reality contained beneath the surface of the Matrix. We use the term dream here deliberately, as what follows directly after the encounter in the interrogation room is Neo waking up from a dream, although what has previously occurred is as real as anything from the vantage point of the Matrix. An ingenious tactic from the perspective of the agents, who can thus get away with mind-bending reality tricks, not just in the form of a futuristic bug, but also potentially masking their gravity-bending antics, as seen in the opening shots of the film, where we might assume that the police officers witnessing these extreme feats of superhuman powers will themselves soon wake up from what they will have perceived as that of nothing but a wild dream. The bug might also relate a sort of connectivity between the simulated and the world behind it, in which reality must correspond with itself in the following sense. That is, in order for a simulation to properly function, it is limited by the fact that the simulation must cohere to the laws of physics, in which it would be potentially possible for someone to inductively discover that their world was that of a simulation running. We might, for example, conjecture that there was not just one but many simulations being implemented, such that because of space constrictions, it could potentially be possible for someone to discover compression being put in place in terms of the reality construction of the simulation itself. In addition, there might be other feasibility issues such as glitches and inconsistencies, which make the simulated world vulnerable to scientific discovery of its underlying true ontology. This is indeed depicted in the film in a later scene where we witness Neo commenting on a sense of déjà vu when commenting on the same cat appearing twice in a row before him in succession. These arguments of this type then all point to a sense of which physical evidence is able to undermine a real-world simulation hypothesis, bringing into question if the world we inhabit is nothing but a simulation. I will also add here the physicist response in regards to a potential simulation, that it will have to properly overcome, not just restrictions in terms of energy and computational restraints, but also that of properly giving a simulated account for the fundamental laws of quantum mechanics, as well as being able to sufficiently simulate Einstein's theory of gravity or general relativity, which at present is not something that even quantum computers in the future are thought to achieve, according to some physicists. These then are all substantial problems which a potential simulation will have to address, in which we might add that proponents of the simulation hypothesis have at present not been able to produce strong novel predictions according to their worldview which can be experimentally tested, which puts their model at risk of falsification in the standard Popperian sense. Returning to the film, we witness a very memorable scene of Morpheus giving Neo the choice between the blue and the red pill, which corresponds directly to each pill offering different reprogrammings for the potential pill candidate. Morpheus makes reference again to the story of Alice tumbling down her rabbit hole, while remarking that Neo has the look of someone accepting what they see only because he is expecting to wake up, which drags us yet again into the problem of illusion, which for Morpheus seems clearly demarcated between the simulated world of the Matrix and the real world behind the illusion. Thus, an important point here is that it does not seem, at least to Morpheus, that there could be more simulations running in the program, such as his own claimed reality, which he wants to take Neo from in this scene. Also, it's interesting to point out, as upon first viewing, that it is natural to see Morpheus mostly through the guise of a wise teacher with a strong sense of both authority as well as competency in his held views as to the nature of things. It is only when the movie progresses further that we learn that Morpheus himself is just as committed to faith as can be seen when he espouses the prophecy of the One, embodied by Neo himself. Nonetheless, as we will discuss in a further scene detailing the Oracle, it is possible to predict the future or give a deterministic account of the future without being committed to a fatalist view. That is, a view which espouses that whatever event that is predicted to occur in the future will be bound to happen at all costs. Thus, this negates the sense of agency and determination which Neo feels so important when he responds to Morpheus's questions, which poses the questions if he believes in fate, to quote, "I don't like the idea that I am not in control of my life," is what Neo responds. It seems that for Morpheus, Neo has to make up his own mind both in relation to choosing the path of the red pill, which signifies an unveiling of the external world, as well as making up his own mind as to what role he will play in the larger cosmos of things. In any case, we see Neo tumbling down the rabbit hole in the form of becoming subsumed by the floating mirror appearing before him. We note that in Taoist religion, the mirror is seen as a weapon against ghosts, as the ghosts become both afraid of their own image as they reflect their own internal negative energy, but also if they enter the mirror, they will become trapped in another dimension. The mirror thus symbolizes a dynamic reflection of the changing nature of the world, where not all is what it seems. That is, there is the possibility of external dimensions and parallel worlds that we are not able to perceive as human beings. Coming back to the mirror, then, it is often used to further emphasize the general Taoist philosophy that everything is in a state of impermanence and change. Indeed, through Neo entering through the mirror, this will begin his journey of transformation, which is again a crucial component of good storytelling. Much like Luke Skywalker learning the ropes of becoming a Jedi through Yoda, then Neo will incorporate new lessons from the role of Morpheus in the film. In the next scene, we see Neo waking up in one of the millions of pods in the machine field, where he has been literally plugged in, much like an electronic device. And this is such an iconic image and moment in the film that I will save this for the next segment in our Matrix analysis series. If you have any further favorite scenes in the movie or want to relate any thoughts regarding the film, please feel free to do so in the comments section. Or if you have any other thoughts, you can leave them as well. As always, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe for more videos. Then until next time, cheers!